Hi everyone, I'm Jemima. Very glad to be here. Like I said, this is my seventh Italian city. I only come back for the food. So if you have any food recommendations for where I should eat, please let me know. I'm making a list of places where I've had the best food in Italy. So far, Rome is at the top. So if you think Bologna can beat that, get in touch. Anywho, I'm going to be talking to you today about JavaScript, but specifically, I can't believe it's not JavaScript. Basically, what I'm going to be showing you in this talk is demos of custom components on web that's going to make you say, what? That's not JavaScript. So hopefully when you see the demos, you will actually have that reaction. But a little bit about me. Like they said, my name is Jemima. I am a self-taught front-end developer. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. Basically, what that means, I'm an overachiever. I was a gifted student and I like carrying that passion for the rest of my life. If you want to find me online, that's at Jemima Abu. So that's LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, whatever, anywhere. So for those food recommendations, you can send them to me on Twitter at Jemima Abu. Very important. That's the only reason I'm here right now. So let's keep that in mind. So like I said, today I'm going to be talking to you about how to build things without using JavaScript. But I feel like before I start telling you why you shouldn't be using JavaScript, let's get into what JavaScript actually was intended to be at the beginning. And we're going way back to the very creation of the internet. So now the internet was made in I want to say 1989, but this isn't trivia, so I'm not going to try. Basically, when the internet was created, it was a very simple place. What that means is this is what websites look like. The internet was built with HTML, CSS sometimes, but that was very optional if you didn't want it. The purpose of the internet was to display information to people in a way that was easily accessible. So you could share blog posts or news or anything, and it would reach millions of people at a time. And this was a very simple place. So before JavaScript, all websites were static. What this means is that we didn't have a lot of interactivity on the web. It would be the same thing as if I oh, oh, who's that? Who's that? It's me. Shocked myself there. Basically, what this meant was a website was pretty much the same thing as pinning paper on a board, right? That was what HTML was. It was simple content. But the issue with that was that it wasn't very quick. So let's put it that way. Back then, if you wanted to communicate with a server, so if a user was filling out a form on a page, for example, you would have to take that form, submit it to a server, receive the error from the server, and then display it back on the page. So now you're displaying like two HTML pages basically. Back then you had like dial-up internet, so the internet wasn't even that fast. We didn't have this 5G nonsense. We're doing like 1G back then. I think. I don't know. Anyway, what that meant was that if you were submitting a form, you had to wait 1 minute to submit to the server, 1 minute to hear back from the server, display an error on the page. This was very slow and very annoying. So there was a browser called Netscape Navigator, and what they wanted to do was how can we prevent that long process of having to wait for server response and then displaying it on the page? So they came up with the concept of client-side validation. What this meant was that instead of submitting your form and waiting for the server to do a response, you would just handle that validation on the web. So this would be things like, oh, your password is wrong or your email is in the wrong format. And that is why JavaScript was created. Netscape Navigator contracted a developer called Brendan H, and he developed JavaScript in 10 days. And I feel like whenever I hear this stat, I'm like, that makes sense. JavaScript of all languages would have been built in 10 days. And then that brings us to our current predicament. So the fact is, when JavaScript was created, it was intended to support the web. But right now, JavaScript is running the web. We have so many browsers these days, or so many websites these days that are fully run on JavaScript. It's impossible to like go to any website that doesn't use JavaScript. The problem we have with that is that it has a lot of dependency and instability in itself. So I'm going to tell you guys a fun little story. I love telling this story. Basically, of how one programmer broke the internet by deleting, like, what was it, 6 lines of code? So, you ready for this? Back in 2016, there was, you guys know NPM, right? That package manager where you can publish any package. It's kind of like social media. You just put whatever crap on it and nobody cares. That's what NPM is. So now, there was a developer by the name of Azure. Azure used to publish a lot of packages on NPM. One of the packages he published was something called Kik, K-I-K. No idea what it did, but there was another social media platform also called Kik, K-I-K. So this Kik goes to Azure and they're like, bruh, you can't have a package that has the same name as our company. We need you to take it down. Azure is like, F you guys, you can't tell me what to do. Kik goes to NPM and they're like, NPM, tell that dude to take his package down. NPM goes to Azure and they're like, Azure, take the package down. And Azure is like, fine, but if I'm taking my package down, I'm taking all my packages down. And NPM was like, we don't care. So Azure takes all his packages down. 2 hours later, websites all over the world start breaking. We're talking Spotify, we're talking Netflix, we're talking Facebook, and ironically, we're talking Kick. Now, what happened here? The issue was, Azer, while he deleted Kick, he also had another package called LeftPad. LeftPad was a very simple package. All it did was append characters behind a string. Very simple, right? You're like, why would I ever download a package for that? But the problem was there was another package that had downloaded LeftPad as a dependency. And that other package was downloaded in another package, which was in another package, until it reached large packages like React and Babel. What that meant was that when people were trying to run their React package, their React websites now, they were getting an error that says LeftPad could not be found. So because one developer deleted one package that they had online, the entire React ecosystem was down for the amount of time it took them to put it back up. So eventually NPM had, and I think that was why NPM installed a new rule where you can't delete a package, you can only depreciate it. So instead of deleting your package, you just say, oh, I'm not updating that anymore. But the fact is that kind of shows you how unstable JavaScript as a language is when so many websites depend on it. There's a lot of insecurity involved, there's a lot of unpredictability involved. And so what I'm trying to do is get back to a state where we're not necessarily not using JavaScript at all, but we are reducing JavaScript dependency. What I mean by reducing JavaScript dependency is if I go on your website, am I able to carry out the function of that website with if JavaScript is not working on it? So what that means is if your website is delivering information, can users actually access that information if JavaScript is not working? If there's an error in your scripts, are you preventing users from reaching that information? We're trying to get back to this stage where we had the internet originally, where you use HTML and CSS for the actual content of your website and use JavaScript for functionality. Because JavaScript is definitely a great language. It can do so many things. That's why we have a whole day dedicated to it. That's what we're here for. But in this demo, we're just going to be looking at how can we actually reduce JavaScript? Do we actually need all these packages that we're using to do things? Maybe not. Let's see. Let's get into it. So I'm going to be showing you a bunch of code pens. Also, bear with me here. My thing is, I'm never sure if people prefer screenshots or actual demos. This will be actual demos where I'll be showing you the code, but at the end, I'm going to have a QR code where you can leave feedback, and if you would have preferred screenshots, just let me know. This is just some A-B testing we're doing. It's not going to affect what you see today, but for the future, maybe somebody else will prefer it. All right, first implementation we're going to be looking at is a simple light to dark mode switcher. So this is just a theme switcher. Lots of websites have it. It's something that allows you to toggle the context on your page, right? So let's look at the JavaScript. Yay! All right, this is our theme switcher built. Let me zoom in a bit. Also, I don't know if this thing is, so the display is very pixelated. I want to assure you, it looks fine on my laptop. But if it's glitchy on your laptop, it's not my code, okay? It's the screen, so don't blame me for that. So this is our simple, I swear that was so smooth on my laptop or whatever. This is our theme switcher built with JavaScript. So as we can see, all it's doing is changing the content and the colors on the page, right? This is the JavaScript that we have to do that. We're just checking if our input is clicked, and if it is, update the, what's it called? Update the colors. Now let's look at how we would have done that without using any JavaScript at all. So you see here, no JavaScript, I'm not lying. And yet, it still works. What? That's crazy. I can't believe it's not JavaScript. I know, right? Exactly. So this is an example of a piece of code that we can implement without using JavaScript. So let's take a look at what's actually happening here. Now, this is our JavaScript code. As you can see, it makes me very sad because you have to check like if you have toggled your input or not. And this is how we achieve that exact same effect without using any JavaScript at all, by using the has pseudo selector in CSS. Has is a pseudo selector that lets you target a specific element within a parent body. So basically, all I'm saying here is if the body tag has an input with the ID team switcher that is checked, apply this styling. So let's go back to our CSS and see what's actually happening. This code right here is what is handling all the work of actually updating the theme switcher. So all I'm saying is, and then to confirm, this is the theme switcher ID that we're checking for here. So we're just saying if this input is checked, apply the dark mode styling. And that's how we've implemented this entire functionality. So now, of course, if this was in a real life situation, you would want to use JavaScript in a case like this to handle things like storing the user's preference in local storage. So if I've selected that I want dark mode enabled today and I come back to the website tomorrow, I still want to see dark mode. So that is another example of how we can use JavaScript for functionality as opposed to for content. So while it might not be this exact scenario, keeping things like CSS pseudo selector in mind is great because it's like, do I actually have to use JavaScript to check if this input has been clicked or not, or can I use CSS to get away with it? There's something to keep in mind. Another great thing about Has is that it's fully supported. So this is something you can use in production right now. So if you are using theme switchers, has anyone tried to implement a theme switcher in React before? Does anyone here write React? React? Oh, there we go. Theme switchers in React are so unnecessarily complicated and it pisses me off every time because why do I need two different files for a theme switcher? Why do I need a context provider? Why do I need global state management to update the colors? So if you are writing a React application, this has would be perfect for that because React is also a single page application, meaning that as long as the CSS is checked on one page, it will be checked on all your other pages. So React is a great example of how you could use this. Next implementation we're going to be looking at is an accordion. Yeah, great. So an accordion is a simple you know what an accordion is? It's something that like toggles information. You click something, it shows you something else. Yeah, great. This is something that we commonly use JavaScript for because anything that involves like toggling display of something or moving things over, we tend to use JavaScript for it. But when it comes to accordion specifically, you do not need any JavaScript at all. Don't believe me? Just watch. Let's look into it. So now this is our what's it called? Our accordion that uses JavaScript. So we click here, we see the contents, yeah, blah. And this is all the JavaScript we're using for that, right? And I want you to notice how the JavaScript is also increasing in size. So for example, for the theme switcher, it was 6 lines. Now we have 14 lines, and so on and so forth. So now in this accordion, we're just checking if the accordion has been clicked, then run it, whatever. Now let's see how we will do that without using any JavaScript at all. Look, man, NodeJS. And it still works. Yeah. I'm very excited about not using JavaScript, clearly. So yes, this is what an accordion would look like if we were implementing it without using any JavaScript at all. And this is this is the JavaScript code for the accordion, as we've said. Ugh, it's so ugly, I hate it. And this is the HTML code for implementing an accordion without using any JavaScript. Now the thing with details is that details have been around for a long time, but people tend to not use details when it comes to accordion because when it first came out, it wasn't fully supported. By the time it was supported, some other browsers didn't support it. Then they had styling issues, then this and then that. But the thing about details is that it is fully supported everywhere now. It does, all the styling issues have been fixed. You can style details as well as you want. And this is another issue that we have with these new modern web APIs. The problem is you hear about something cool and you're like, oh great, I want to start using that. And then they're like, oh sorry, it's not supported. Now I've lost interest and I've already finished building my code, and then 2 years later you're telling me it's done. So that's another reason what this talk is about, is just to tell you that, oh, these things you may have heard about before, you can start using them in production now, such as details. So let's take a look at what the code here is. Actually, no, that's pretty much all it was, just details. I think you've seen that already. But yeah, the other thing I want to say with details is another reason that details is great as opposed instead of using JavaScript. And this brings us back to the thing I was talking about, how JavaScript is unstable. So let's say, for example, you had an issue in your JavaScript code, right? Now I'm clicking this accordion, but nothing is opening. What this means is the second you get an issue in your JavaScript, your accordion no longer functions. So if this like if frequently asked questions, users would not be able to access the content that's actually in this page. So, but on the other hand, if we look at details, that's not details. I should be closing these tabs. Go away. There you go. If we look at details without JavaScript, even if we didn't have, let's say we didn't have any CSS at all, there, it still works because it's a HTML element. So because you're using these features, these functionalities, these elements that are already inbuilt in the browser, it means you don't have to account for things like, oh, the script doesn't load, or it's taking a while for the CSS to download. The point is, at the end of the day, users would still be able to access this functionality, even if certain things didn't load on the page. Let's look at one more cool feature that details has before we move on. So for example, let's say I have this text inside here, and I'm trying to find this text, right? So now I've typed this up on the screen, and here it's showing me that, oh yeah, this text is present on the page, but I don't actually know where it is because it's hidden in the accordion. But on the other hand, if we go, let me put this back. If we go back to details, It opens by itself automatically. This is another inbuilt feature that details has. It means that if you are searching for something in the page that is within the details element, it's still displayed on the page when the user carries out the native search. So it's just things like this. Using these native features that are already inbuilt in the web, it means you can take advantage of all these functionalities that they already have without having to write it yourself. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm assuming all the murmur is because we're so impressed by what details is going on. So yeah, keep it up. Okay. Now let's look at something else that is another modification of the details elements. So for example, if you wanted an accordion where, okay, if I click one, it closes the other one before it opens. This is what the JavaScript for that looks like. It's like 24 lines of code. Ugh, disgusting. Hate that. Let's look at how we would write this same effect, no JavaScript, and yet it still closes when another one closes. How are we achieving this? Yeah, we know that's gross. Simply by adding a name attribute to the details element. So you can also group detail elements to like say, okay, if this detail element is open, close another one. Once you give them the same name, they just work in a group and they auto toggle each other. So that's another super cool feature that details has enabled. Let's look at one more super cool feature that details has enabled before we go on. So now this is, you know how like sometimes you want to make a smooth animation with CSS. So I'm like, oh, I want to animate this from height 0 to height auto, and CSS is no, you can't do that. So you have to use JavaScript to calculate the client height. So if we were trying to implement, let me see how this thing looks here. Yeah, God, that's terrible. I swear it's so smooth on my laptop. If we're trying to implement the like smooth transition of height, you would have to use JavaScript to like calculate the client height first, and then use that to actually put in that transition. So let's see how we'll do that without using JavaScript. Ta-da! It still smoothly animates the height without any JavaScript at all. What you will notice though is that this isn't a code pen, this is a GIF. That's because this feature isn't fully supported yet. But it's something cool to keep in mind. So let's take a look at what we're actually doing here. There's a new CSS feature that's called calc size auto. So calc size basically gives you the same implementation that the JavaScript get client width or get client height would give you. Calc size calculates, okay, what is the actual height of this product? And then that is what allows you put that transition where it can transition from height 0 to height auto smoothly. Another feature that, oh yeah, here, limited availability, unfortunately, but something to keep in mind out for because it might be supported in the future and then you'll be able to use it. And that feature we're using here is also the starting style. So one thing you might have noticed previously is that if you're trying to animate something that has like, let's say a display none on it, and you're like, oh, if it's display none and opacity 0, then let it fade 90 to opacity 1. But then it doesn't really work because the way browsers are is like if something is not displayed, it doesn't really allow smooth transitions on them. Starting style is another feature that we use to prevent that. Basically, what starting style says is we're going to start the style of this thing at height 0 or at display none, and I still want my transitions to apply smoothly. So the combination of these two features here and here is what gives us this nice smooth toggle without using any JavaScript at all. Yay, that's great. Let's move on. Okay, third feature we're going to be looking at is a modal. Hello world. We're going to be looking at how to implement a modal without using any JavaScript at all. And because I like you guys, not only are there two demos, there's one extra demo because I'm generous. So let's look at how we can implement a modal without using any JavaScript through HTML and CSS. So first we're going to look at it with the JavaScript method. Let's slide that up there. Ciao JSday, it's you guys, hi. Now, this is the JavaScript functionality for implementing a modal, and this is 32 lines of code. One thing that I want people to keep in mind is that it's not just for example, when it comes to implementing modals, it's not just, oh, I click something and something displays. There's a lot of features involved in modals that people tend to not think about, such as does modal receive autofocus when it's actually opened? Are you trapping focus in the modal? So if the modal is open, can the user still tab out of the modal to other parts of the page? Are you returning focus to the original part of the page when the modal is improved? Are you allowing the user to be able to close the modal on blur? For example, if I click outside the modal, can it be closed? So now this is our JavaScript modal, and having to implement all those functionalities. So for example, this is how we just add the active class, but we also have to make sure we're updating the area heading. We have to make sure we are handling close on blur. So when it closes this overlay here, the modal closes as well. We have to make sure we're handling focus and all these things. So there are a lot of features involved in making sure a modal is fully performant and accessible when building with JavaScript. But we can achieve that exact same modal without any of the actual work of the JavaScript implementations. Once again, no JavaScript, see, nothing up my sleeves. And it still works. Now, this is a modal that uses one HTML attribute and it has all the inbuilt functionality that our JavaScript modal had. So for example, it gets autofocus if it needs to. If I click outside the modal, it closes by itself. I'm not using any JavaScript to do that. So how is this actually working? We use one attribute called the popover. Popover is an attribute in HTML that gives a modal, like makes something a modal, for example. And then we have a popover target that we use to target that actual modal. So let me just break down what's happening here. On this div, we have the popover attribute, and this div has an ID of modal. In the button, our popover target is that ID, and that's all we need to tell our modal that, okay, I need you to open this thing. So let's take a look at, now this is all the styling I've done for the modal, but let's take a look at if there was no styling at all. Hold on. You know when you have a random comment somewhere and it just breaks your things? Okay. Here. So now this is purely HTML, no CSS at all. And you notice that the modal still works as intended to. So it still works on click, it still gets focus when it needs to, and it still closes on blur. So popover is all the inbuilt HTML attributes of a modal without needing any styling or any CSS at all, or any JavaScript at all. It just works by itself. And that really cool feature that popover has is that it also gives you certain attributes so you can style by yourself. So you'll notice here, I have my modal backdrop, and that is what's actually giving this thing this fade display. So I don't need to create another div or use a before or after class. Popover comes with its own backdrop, and that is what allows you to have this easily styled modal without needing to do anything. So yeah, popover, it's great. Think about it. Let's look at the other way we could do this by using only CSS. I mean, obviously there's HTML involved too, but like CSS is the styling for it. So this is our CSS modal, and we notice that when we click it, the modal appears here. The difference between what we're doing here is that as opposed to targeting using the popover attribute, what we're actually doing is targeting this section ID here. CSS has a pseudo selector. Hold on. Here. CSS had a pseudo selector called targets that allows you target certain style methods based on the hash link. So what I'm doing here is that when this modal is clicked, I have this href set to hashtag modal. So you know how normally that would just allow you scroll to a certain section that has the modal ID, but instead what I'm saying is, oh CSS, if the hashtag modal is active, display the actual modal. And then that's all that I'm doing here with the styling of just saying if I'm using like not target, display none, but it's basically the same thing as saying if the modal is the target, then set a display of active. So targets and that pseudo selector that we can use in CSS to target things like active links. You might not necessarily use it for a modal in this situation, but if I wanted to target an active link or highlight an active section or anything related to styling something based on the active link, target's a great example of how we could do that. So let's go back to the code and see if I feel like there's something else I wanted to tell you about modal, but I can't remember now. Not sure it was. Oh yeah, this one. Another thing you can also do with modal is put the animation on appearance. Is my animation showing? Dang. So the animation is going like this. Ooh. It's very smooth. It looks very cool. You can't see it on the screen, but you can take my word for it. So this is a way of just animating the modal. So I'm saying, okay, when the modal opens, scale it out. And how am I doing that? How am I doing that? Where's the code for that? Here. Another feature that we have for animating styles in CSS or modal styles is popover open. So all I'm saying here is that once the popover is open, change the opacity to 1 and then give it a transform of like improve the scale basically. And I'm also using the starting style here to indicate that I want this thing to start from opacity of 0, translate to opacity of 1. So this is another example of how we can do smooth animations in CSS without using any JavaScript at all. Once again, no JavaScript. Yay. Can you guys believe it's not JavaScript? Right? No, that's crazy. Okay. So yeah, we do that using the popover and everything. Another one we're going to be looking at, and I think this is the last demo, but I saved it for last because I think it's the coolest one. You know how sometimes you want to animate things on scroll? So like if as an element enters the page, I want this to sliding from the left, I want this to sliding from the right and fade. Now normally you have to use JavaScript to do this because you need to use scroll event listeners. But now maybe you don't have to use JavaScript at all. Let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at how we would do this using JavaScript. I'm gonna go close all these other tabs. Shh, go away. Excellent. So now this is our animation here. So this one just fades in, this one slides into the top, this one slides in from the left, blah, blah, blah. This is how everything is being done. Now let's take a look at how we would do this without using any JavaScript at all. Dun, da, da, da. And it still works. And the crowd goes wild. Woo! Yeah. So now it's completely possible to have scroll animations without using any JavaScript at all. And you see that it still reverts itself when you're scrolling back, it appears when you're scrolling up, everything works fine. And the thing I want to point out with this before I show you how I'm doing this is that this actually works so much faster than JavaScript. So for example, if I scroll really fast to the bottom, you see like there's a lag before the actual animation comes in. But if I go to the CSS one and I scroll really fast to the bottom, it appears like instantly. It's not based on the scroll listener or anything. So the CSS version is actually slightly more performant than JavaScript because it's not limited by speed. So let's take a look at how we're doing this. This is all the code you need to write to handle scroll animations in Java. Doesn't this make you want to cry? Isn't this terrible looking? Ugh, I hate this. Throwing tomatoes at the screen. This is how we handle that same code using only CSS. What we're doing here is we're using this thing called animation timeline, basically. Animation timeline is a CSS property that allows you to specify, I want to link an animation to either a view or a scroll. So what the view means is when this element is in view, then make my animation appear. So let's break down what's happening here. We're giving an animation a view timeline name of fading timeline, and we're assigning that view timeline name to our animation timeline. When we get down here, we're also assigning our animation range. Basically, what we're saying here is when this element is 25% in the screen, I want you to start the animation, and when it has covered 50% of the screen, I want you to stop the animation. So previously with animations, you had to say things like, oh, I want this to be 250 milliseconds. So now, as opposed to giving it a time, you can actually give it a range. So let's see if we can take a look at the actual procedure of what's happening here. So this is a breakdown of how the scroll-driven animation works. You see that once it has reached the 25% of the screen, that's where our animation starts. When it's covered 50% of the screen, our animation is complete, and then it just finishes out of the screen that way. If we also go back to the code, another thing you'll notice is that... Sorry, it's a lot of code, but let me find it. Here. The next method that we also use is the fill-in mode, both. So fill-in mode is basically what we use to say, I want this thing to go forwards and backwards. So that's why when we're scrolling upwards, the animation can appear in. And when we're scrolling downwards, the animation disappears. So fill-in mode is what allows us actually toggle that forward and backwards animation. But yeah, this is just another example of of course, neither of it's supported. It's just something cool that I want you guys to be aware of. But this is just another example of a really cool feature with CSS that now helps you prevent JavaScript. And the fact is, it's not supported now, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, it will be fully supported, and then you can start using it in production. So the purpose of this talk, while it's to show you some cool features you can start using now, it's also to let you know that there are some features that you should keep an eye out for when they're supported in the future. And yeah, this is also another website for if you want to see more cool animations or features that you can do with the CSS scroll timeline. It's, am I blocking the screen? It's scroll-driven animations.style, so I would recommend checking that out. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Normally, I would give you a bunch of links of what to actually check out, but the thing is, because the web is constantly changing, what I'm giving you is people to check out instead. So these are people that they're constantly tweeting about the latest changes. Una, she works on the Google's team, and she writes lots of really cool feature blogs about newest things in CSS. Kevin J. Powell as well. He does some really cool YouTube videos on how to actually build things with CSS. Jay, he works on, he like, he does things on Twitter with CSS that I'm like, this should be illegal. It shouldn't be possible to make animations that look this cool. And Utility Bend also does really cool blogs on the Open UI platform. So yeah, these are just some people to check out that I would recommend. This is that QR code I was telling you about for how you're going to tell me how great my talk was. So when you want to give me feedback, positive comments only. If it's negative, I'll block you. So just scan that QR code and be like, oh my God, Jemima, I loved your talk. It was so great. Or I loved your talk. It was amazing. Stuff like that. But yeah, QR code for feedback. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the talk. And if you have any questions, I'll take them now. And now you can clap.